Do you know how to solve this? Or that? No? Well, those are two of the most commonly asked questions on Python coding interviews. And this course will teach you how to solve those and more Python interview questions and coding exercises. Python is by far the most popular programming language out there because it is easy to learn and implement on high-scale projects. Fields such as machine learning, data mining, data science, and automation are dominated by Python. And by taking this course, you will master every possible Python exercise that you could be asked on coding interview and eventually get your dream job. This course will also look at the interview process as a whole and teach you how the interviews are conducted in the giant software companies such as Amazon, Apple, Google, and Microsoft. You understand the culture of their recruiters and interviewers. Most recruiters will normally tell you that the candidates are evaluated based on 4 criteria: prior experience, culture fit, coding skills, and analytical ability. Those 4 components are all in play, but typically the final decision comes based on your coding skills and your intelligence. For that reason, most of this course is devoted to improve your coding and algorithm skills. We will use a unique approach to make your learning quick. Even if you have years of experience as a software developer, coding interviews are a different beast. You need practice. For that reason, we dedicated most of this course to very specific Python topics that are very high in use on interviews. Those are operation with lists, strings, hashing, sorting, searching, and more. You will find a separate section for each of those, which means that the chance that you would see an interview question that you haven't seen in that course is very low. Now, in this course, we're studying Python for coding interviews, and you will see that I did a lot of effort to extract specifically these questions that were asked from the big tech companies in the United States. So this course will really give you everything you need to know in order to get prepared for coding interviews. And the reason to study that is obvious. Because you want to land your dream job. You're either a student or a person that wants to change his career path. And it is inevitable that you need to do this preparation, specifically if you are applying for jobs actively. I'm uploading completely free programming courses every week, so make sure you hit the subscribe button to get more coding skills. Hi everyone, and welcome to the first section of our course. In this section, I want to give you a brief introduction to what to expect from the interviews. No matter in which software company you're going to apply, there is a certain interview process applicable for all of those companies. And these are the coding interviews, the phone screening, and also there are some specific things that are happening into the most of the large companies such as Microsoft, Google, Apple, and so on. So in this section, we're not only going to cover the basics for going to an interview for a software company, but also I'm going to look specifically at those huge companies and I'm going to show you a very useful tips and basically things that the recruiters in those large companies are actually doing into the process for hiring you, the candidate. So most of the companies are conducting interviews in really similar ways. So usually before even meeting the technical team that is going to conduct the technical interview with you, you are going to go through the process called phone screening. And this usually means that the recruiter will call you and will ask you some questions. This is not necessarily a technical question, right? You might be asked questions for where you live, what is your past experience, and they don't actually check if this experience is actually there, but they simply have the job description in front of them, your resume in front of them, and what you say. So they basically compare what you say to what the job requires. You might even meet the recruiters in school, especially if you're in university and there is something like a job fair. In that case, you could talk to the recruiters in person, which for me is actually more useful because the face-to-face impression is obviously way more influential comparing to the phone one, but for 99% of the jobs, the very first step is when the recruiter calls you. Well, I told you that in 99% you're just going to talk with a recruiter, but there are also many cases in which a technical person will call you instantly from the first call. So I would always advise you to ask for the position of the person that is calling you. So you know, if it's an engineer, you might get more technical questions. If it's a recruiter, you might get questions of a sort, what salary you expect, where you're located, and so on. So if you, for example, talk with an engineer or member of the technical team, they even might ask you questions regarding the coding languages and tools that you've been using, and they will really value a confident answer to those questions. If the phone interview is actually a coding interview, they might ask you to write a code on a paper and go over it on the phone. Some recruiters might even give you a homework to solve. For example, a question or a task that you will need to complete until a certain period of time. For example, recently I was applying for a job and they sent me a PDF file of 2 pages with a task that I need to complete until a certain date. Until I think the period was about 2 weeks, so you can expect from 1 to 2 weeks time to complete this task as well. For most of the companies, once you complete the phone screening, and after 1 or 2 phone screening interviews, you might be invited to on-site interview. And this means that you visit a company and there you conduct 1 to 6 interviews. And those are going to be interviews with different type of people that hold different positions. Usually the very first interview is a lunch interview with not technical person. This person usually do not submit a feedback, so this is a great opportunity to really be yourself and ask the questions that really interest you without being worried that this will impact in a negative way whether you're going to be hired or not in the company. So from the first interview, you can really get as much information as you like. You can ask about the company culture, how it's like working for the company, the working hours, maybe even discuss the salary, and so on. It's like talking with a friend. The next interviews are going to be pretty much technical interviews, and they will actually include a combination between coding and algorithmic questions. So there is really the time for you to shine and show your amazing coding skills that I hope you learn in this course. And I also advise you not to lie in your resume, because also in those interviews, there will be a person that will take your whole resume and point by point ask you question by question for each of your experiences in educations that you had in the past. And also if you claim that you know something, they might ask you for it. They really go in a detail on this resume, so try not to write something stupid there. Usually the interviews would take about a week in order to decide whether you're suitable for the job or not. And they should give you a status update on your application. If you've been waiting more than a week, remind them, because sometimes it happens that the processing time is a little bit longer. So you want to make sure that they are still processing your application, so you don't get discouraged without any reason. And also many companies might even not saying you anything, but this doesn't mean that you're not accepted for the job. Some companies are having list of hires, and even if you're not accepted for the job right now, in the future they already conducted the interviews with you, so they might still accept you at some further point in the future, which doesn't mean that you should stop looking for another opportunities and other companies, of course. So many candidates and people that are reaching me over LinkedIn and Instagram mainly are asking me if there is a certain set of questions that recruiters are actually asking the candidates. Like, can you get just a list of these questions with the answers and then just use the answers to the questions of the recruiters? That would make you the perfect candidate, right? Well, the thing is, the questions that's been asked does not depend on the company at all. They depend only on the recruiter, and recruiter is a human. There is no specific list of interview questions. The recruiters usually ask questions that they've been asked when they were hired in the company in the past, or they simply Google them in internet. Yes, they will do the same like you. They will just go on internet and they will look for questions that are usually good to ask a person that has to be employed in your company. Usually, they train the people that are involved in the interviews, the interviewers, but the training doesn't involve specific questions. They usually concentrate on topics that you should avoid talking with the people. And you can imagine those are topics like gender, race, and so on. Topics that wouldn't offend the people and put the company into trouble. It is also a very common practice that interviewers would actually give you a list of questions, so for technical questions, and would ask you to pick some of them. This is a good thing for you because you can really choose between the topics that you like the most and you feel the most confident with, but also puts you in a risk because at the same time you need to prove that you're really the best with the topics that you chose. The question asked between the different companies are of course going to be different and depending on the job that you're applying for. For example, the web-based companies are more likely to ask you system design questions, and companies that are focused on databases would of course ask you database questions. But I would say that if we talk about in general all the software companies, most of the questions fell into the broad data structures and algorithms category. So these are actually going to be the categories that would focus the most because you would have a higher chance to get questions from that category. The preparation for the interviews actually do not start and finish in 2 days. You actually need to start exactly a year before the interview because you need to learn a lot. You need to get the right technical experience, then apply for companies and also begin solve actual questions. In general, when you solve those questions and when you go to the technical interview, not only the correct answer of your question is evaluated, there's actually way more going into that interview. It is even possible that you get some questions completely wrong, but the interviewer still find you as a good candidate for the work. And this is because there are four main categories that the interviewers are looking at when they choose whether they want to hire you or not. And those are your experience, and this they get from your resume. Then, if you fit into their culture, into the company culture, and this is solely focused on your character. So you need to be a nice person, of course. You need to meet the company values. So they are going to examine your character very good. You shouldn't be arrogant or not admitting your mistakes if they tell you, and so on. Then they would, of course, check your coding skills and how you write code and your analytical ability. And as you can see, solving the question they gave you actually only falls into one of those categories, into coding skills. But even if you don't get the right answer, if they see that you have the right analytical skills, so you analyze the question very good, and even in that case, if you make a small mistake, but you have the right experience and you have a great character, you analyze the question quite good, but you get the wrong answer, well, that's fixable. So you might still be considered for the role. Of course, if there is not other candidate that have got those three, but also got the correct answer on the coding skills. Pretty much whether you're accepted for the job or not could fall into one very small thing. You might just discuss a problem that is important for the interviewer, and he might think, okay, this person is smart. He gave me a good answer to that question, and he really thinks about this problem, and he has some good ideas how to solve it. Meanwhile, the cultural fit might be more important into smaller companies rather than the big companies. They might want to see that you're actually able to overtake tasks independently and make the right decisions in the situations. You just need to understand that the interviewing is not a perfect science. There is a lot of randomness It doesn't only depend on your performance, but also on the decision hiring committee. So bear in mind that rejection is not like a life sentence because there are different people, and some people might really like your skills and some people might think that you're absolutely terrible. You just need to keep trying and after every interview to try and prove yourself. So as I said, one of the biggest rumors when going to interview is that you need to get every single answer correct. This is completely false. The interview questions are usually not determined as correct or incorrect. If I conduct an interview, I would never ask myself how this person performed on this or that question. No, you ask yourself in general. Did you have in general the impression that the person is smart and will do the job good? So I would think more about how the person got to the solution of the problem. Was his code clean? Was he better comparing than the other candidates? It is very often that you perform good, but just there are candidates that perform better. For example, some people might solve a question for 15 minutes, but another one might solve it for 5 minutes and do it with way better coding than the first one. So this also play a role, and it really doesn't mean that you're not fit for the job. It just means that at that time and moment, they found somebody that can do the job slightly better than you. Now, I know that this topic is not very important for how you perform to the coding interview, but of course, you should know how to dress when you go to the coding interview. So, I put together some table, and here you can see how you can and what you can wear at startups, at large companies like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Facebook, and also not the non-tech companies. So, really, I will not go over this table, you can read it on your own, but you can definitely use it as a reference to so you can just see what is already in there and follow the dress code that I provided to you from the internet. If you want to check out the complete 13 hours Python technical interview questions course, please check in the description. Hello everyone, welcome back to the course. Before continuing to the next videos where I will start talking specifically for each company and how the interviews are held there, first I wanted to emphasize on 10 mistakes that are very common for the candidates into any software company. So let's start by practicing on computer. I know that this might sound strange for you, but today most of the people are getting too lazy to code just because the compilers and the IDEs are getting so sophisticated that they actually predict the code that you want to write. They write the commas and the semicolons instead of you and so on. And when you go to a coding interview, it is very often that you need to write your code on a paper. So trust me, if you don't have the practice to write your code on a paper, but you always write it on a computer, you would definitely make this mistake uh, that you'll be missing some important signs while you are writing your code on paper, which might be the situation specifically when you go to an interview. And they would obviously understand that you probably know the algorithm if you solve the issue, but they would think, okay, this person is doing very sloppy programming, while you give a very good impression if you don't miss these small signs that a person need to have attention to a detail in order to write. The next one is not rehearsing behavioral questions. So many candidates spend their time for preparing to do the technical questions and they completely forget about the behavioral questions. And don't worry, in this course we're gonna go over them. But the interviewer is really judging them too. And not only that, but the behavioral questions might bias the interviewer and they might also bias specifically its impression for your technical performance. So you should really concentrate also on the behavioral questions and to train how you can look confident and look that you know what you're doing and what you're talking makes sense. The next very common mistake is not doing mock interviews. Specifically, if you're a student, go to the career department and request a mock interview with the person from there. They will really help you. Go with a person over the interview. For example, normally the careers department will ask you to choose a job, and then you will send them the job offer, so they will prepare and they will act as an interviewer and you will act as interviewee. And in that case you can see how it's going to be like a real job interview experience, and just train yourself. If you're not a student, you can definitely do this with a friend, a family member, and so on. You can just ask them to prepare and to make a real mock interview with you, so you can really train your interviewing skills. Because trust me, if you prepare on your own, there are definitely going to be surprises once you go there to the interview. Next, I would really not advise you to try memorizing solutions. So memorizing a solution will really help you to solve this specific problem, but will definitely prohibit you from making your brain work. It will definitely not help you to solve new problems. And trust me, through the whole interview process, you're definitely going to see questions that you don't have answer for, and you need to make it with your brain. You cannot just remember absolutely every question and have answer for it, as you cannot remember any technical question and code question and algorithm and do it. You really need to learn how to use your brain, and this is actually what we're going to be training in this course. Not solving particular problems, but training our brain to think and to make solutions when it sees problems. I would also advise you, while you're solving problems on your own, try to talk them out loud. Even try to record yourself and then listen to your explanation. This will really help you to understand how people are seeing and evaluating your skills. So if you're alone, nobody would think that you're crazy. Just start speaking out the solution loud, so you can see that you actually can express yourself and can share your work. Because in many cases you might do a great work, you might perform very well to an interview, but if you cannot share your work, then half of the job that you've done is inevitably lost. The next thing I would advise you not to do is rushing. As you can see, when we're talking together, me and you, I'm really taking my time to explain you every small bit of how the interviews are working, right? I'm not rushing. I'm not going through these points one by one very quickly. This is because I want you to understand. So if you want your interviewer to understand you as well, you should do the same. Take your time, don't rush, because when you rush and when you're not calm and relaxed, you're making mistakes. This is true for every human and you cannot escape from that. If you're rushing, you will do careless mistakes. So take your time, see the problem from a very high level, explore it, and then write your code thoughtfully. The next mistake that many people are doing is the sloppy coding. You can definitely write a bug-free code, but at the same time, the code might look absolutely terrible or not efficient. For example, a duplicate code is not a very good idea, and you should really look at the best practices, not only how to solve problems, but also the best practices used in coding. I can give you an example. Instead of duplicating code on many places, you can do a function and just use the name of the function instead of this duplicated code. This makes sense, right? Then you know that many IDEs have actually the debug options, and you can do the same on a paper. Try running variables through your code and see in your brain if it works. Or even if you have the compiler, test in the compiler with some different variables to verify that it works. Testing your code really shows, and here the idea is not only to test your code, but to show the interviewer that you actually know how to create a code from the beginning to the end. Testing your code shows the interviewer that there is a very low chance that you send the final code with mistakes, because you might detect them on the testing. Next is, of course, fixing mistakes carelessly. So when you test your code, you are of course going to discover mistakes and bugs, and this is great that you find your problems. So once you do that, you need to rethink why this occurred and what is the most efficient way to fix it. Rushing over the code and fixing mistakes carelessly is doing nothing else than creating more mistakes, because fixing one thing not thoughtfully will definitely make some other part of the code not working. So if you see a mistake, really take your time and think why it happens and what the variable that you are changing affects in the code. And of course, the final thing is giving up. This is something that you should never do. Until you have the time to solve the problem, you should not give up. You should not show any weakness. You should try until the end, and who knows, even the most impossible problems can be solved if you don't give up. It is the same in life. So no matter how complex algorithm they give you, you can always try stretching your brain, taking some information from the interviewer in order to solve the problems. There are no rules. You have the problem in front of you and you need to find a solution. But anyways, guys, that was the video for today. I really wanted to show you these mistakes because going further into the interviews for Microsoft. That said, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you very much, guys, for watching and for spending your time for taking a look at this video. Please continue with the next one, where I'm gonna show you 10 most common mistakes that are done during interviews. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about one of the most popular companies where software engineers wants to apply for, and this is Microsoft. So Microsoft, like any other big tech company, wants smart people, geeks, people that are passionate about technology. You will probably not be tested on C++ APIs like you might think, but you will be expected to write and understand code. In a typical interview, you show Microsoft that you're good enough for them by participating to an interview in their seat. They will ask you to go in the morning and fill out a paperwork. You have a short interview with a recruiter where he or she will give you sample questions. Your recruiter is usually there to prepare you for what's coming next. They will not ask you, of course, technical questions, and I definitely advise you to be nice with your recruiter, because the recruiter can be your biggest advocate. They can even push the company to re-interview you after you submitted your first interview. They can really fight for you to get hired or not. It's up to you. It's up to how you're talking to them, and also it's up to their character. So during the day, you would go over 4 or 5 interviews, very often with different teams. Unlike many companies where you meet the interviewers in a conference room, you will meet your Microsoft interviewers in their office. This is a really great time to look around and get the feel for the team culture. Depending on the team, the interviewers may share or may not share their feedback with you until the rest of the interview. So once you complete all the interviews with the different teams, you might speak with the hiring manager. This is actually a very good sign, because not every interviewee is speaking with the hiring manager. If you do that, there is a very high chance that you actually pass the interview. And then it will be down to the hiring manager to decide whether you're hired or not. So you even might get the decision on the same day, or you might even ask a week. If you need to wait for more than a week, I really advise you to text to the recruiter and ask them for your status update. I would really advise you for the technical interviews not only to prepare technical questions, but also to prepare and learn a lot about Microsoft. Microsoft really wants to see that you are really passionate about their technology. For example, if they ask you why you won't work in Microsoft, you could answer, I've been using Microsoft software as long as I remember. I'm really impressed about how Microsoft manages to create a product that is universally excellent. For example, I've been using Visual Studio recently to learn game programming, and its API is absolutely great. So this answer really shows that you're passionate about the Microsoft technology. So this is everything I want to share with you guys. This is how a typical Microsoft interview is going. If you're planning to apply for Microsoft, I hope that this was useful for you. I will see you in the next video where we're going to talk about how the interviews for Amazon are going. Thanks for watching. Hi everyone, welcome back to the course, and today we're going to talk about how it's like to apply to a software engineering interview in Amazon. The very first advices that I would tell you from the top of my head is that since the Amazon is web-based company, this means that they really like the scale. They like to scale everything. So make sure that you prepare for questions in large scale. You don't need a background in distribution systems to answer those questions. Just prepare something regarding system design and memory limits. They would definitely ask you about object-oriented design. So I would also advise you to check object-oriented programming if you want to get there, because you definitely have to solve those type of questions. Also, what's unique about the Amazon is that you have a person during the interview called the bar raiser, and depending on your skills or how well you solve problems, they would be asking you harder or easier questions. So the interview will be with the same difficulty for you. It just depends on how experienced you are. You might get more difficult questions that are difficult for your level of expertise. Now, if we talk about how the interview starts step by step, of course, firstly, they're doing the phone screening, and you can see that most of the companies are actually doing that, and this includes Amazon. The screening interviews usually start with one or two phone screens. In those screens, you're interviewed with a specific team. The engineer who is interviewing you will usually ask you to write a simple code and read it out loud on the phone. They will probably also ask you a broad set of questions to explore your knowledge about different types of technologies. That's why it's good if you're a person that is really interested into the technology in general. The next part is that you fly to Seattle. Of course, most probably they're going to pay your ticket to there. And there you have 4 or 5 interviews with one or two teams which have selected you based on your resume and the phone interviews. You have a code whiteboard, and some interviews will stress your other skills. So you might get wide variety of questions. The interviewers there are usually a professional from different areas, and they will probe your answers into different type of topics. Each interviewer in Amazon is required not to see the feedback from the rest interviewers until the final decision is made and until all of them submit the feedback. This is done so they cannot influence each other on the opinions about you. Then you have the Amazon bar raiser interviewer, who is always in charge for keeping the interview bar high. They are people that are attending special training and will make sure that the interview is hard enough for your set of skills. So if you feel that suddenly the interview is getting more and more difficult, well, this is because they most probably realize that you've got the basic skills, and now they want to make the things more and more difficult to you and see until which point you're going to crack. Then in the end of the day, you're actually going to meet your recruiter, and once the interviewers enter their feedback, they will meet together again and then they will discuss whether they want to hire you or not. So here you should also expect that they contact you within a week and they give a final decision whether it is positive or negative. Hi everyone, today we're going to talk about the Google interview and what you can expect from it. There are many scary stories about how difficult the interviews at Google are, but it's mostly just stories. The interview is actually not very different comparing to the one in Microsoft or Amazon. However, because the Google HR can be a little bit disorganized, we really recommend you to be proactive when you're doing the communication between yourself and the company. Usually, you start by phone screen, and in Google, usually the Google engineers are performing the phone screen and they will start shooting technical questions. Then, on your on site interview, you interview 4 to 6 people. One of them will be a lunch interviewer. Just like in Amazon, the interviewer feedback is kept in secret from the rest of the interviewers, so they cannot influence each other. The launch interviewer usually do not submit feedback, so this means that you can really ask them very honest questions without getting worried that this will affect your acceptance in the company. Once you complete your interviews, a written feedback is submitted to the hiring committee of the engineers, and then they make decision whether they want to hire or not. Usually they make and take 4 particular categories to give their feedback. Those are analytical ability, experience, coding, and communication. And for each of those, you are given a score from 1 to 4. You're usually not expected to perform well in each of those categories, but it is very common that if most of the interviewers raise the same red flag into certain category, for example, you get 1 on communication and 4 on the rest, then you would most probably not be accepted because they are looking for an overall rating. You should understand that the Google hiring process is really, really slow. And if you don't receive feedback from them within a week, I definitely advise you to follow up to the recruiter. You should definitely prepare about designing very scalable systems. So look at questions like system design, memory limits. Also, I advise you to prepare for questions about bit manipulation because Google interviewers really like to ask those. So please brush those ones as well. One difference from the other companies I can say about Google is that the interviewers do not actually take the hiring decision. Instead of that, they are just giving a feedback to the hiring committee, which is different set of people. And once that's done, the hiring committee is actually making a decision whether they want to hire you or not. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope this interview was useful, especially if you want to apply for Google. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone, today we're going to talk about how it's like to get interviewed by Apple for software engineers, or what is behind the scenes of that interview with Apple. Being interviewed for Apple, you would of course be required to have a very good technical skills. It is not requested that you're Apple user, but you're definitely required to know a lot about the Apple products. Normally, the employees of Apple are huge Apple fans. So if you show passion about Apple and about the new technologies that they're developing, you definitely have way higher chance to get a job there. It is very common for Apple to do two-on-one interview, which means that there are going to be two people that are interviewing you, but you shouldn't get stressed because this is pretty similar as a one-to-one interview, and even the atmosphere there would be more friendly, and you might not face awkward silence and so on. So obviously the first step here is literally the same like the rest of the tech companies. They're going to start by phone screening. So the recruiter would normally give you a phone call and he will try to feel the basic sense of your skills, and then you might receive some calls from the team members that would normally ask you more technical questions and actually test your technical knowledge and skills. Then everything begins again with the tech interviews, and for the tech interviews, of course, you're going to do them face to face. First of all, you will meet with the recruiter who is going to give you an overview for the process, and then you will have 6 to 8 interviews with members of the Apple team which are going to be interviewing you. You are also going to meet key people with which you potentially be working in the future. As I said, Apple is usually doing one-on-one and two-to-one interviews. You should be prepared to code on whiteboard because in many of their rooms they would have a whiteboard where they would ask you to solve some technical problems and explain them. So having technical skills and clear communication is of a key importance to get successful with that interview. You would normally have at the lunchtime lunch with your potential manager, and this is going to be more casual, but you shouldn't get too calm. This is still an interview. They will see how you behave in a friendly atmosphere. Each interviewer is usually focused on different area and he will examine you in different way. All interviewers in the end of the day would gather their feedbacks and then they will make the final decision. The unique thing with Apple is that usually by the end of the day you would get your decision. If the interviewers gather their notes and they feel like you're a very good fit for the company, and they will tell you in the same day whether you're hired or whether they would like to escort you to the exit and you're actually not hired in the company. So if you actually made it up and you got the job, you're going to be invited in a conference room and all the members with which you took interviews will give you thumbs up, which means that you are accepted to the company, and from there you start planning your future with Apple. So this is how, guys, the Apple interview goes. If you apply for this company in the future, please bear those things in mind that I just shared with you in this interview. That's it. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in our next video. Now, Yahoo usually aims to recruit from the top 10 to 20 schools in the United States. However, they still interview some people from the rest of the schools, and especially people with a lot of experience. If you're one of the lucky selected, the interview usually starts with phone screen. And the phone screen here is with senior employee, either tech lead or manager. If you make it through the phone screen, then you will be invited to an on-site interview where you will see 6 to 7 people that are your potential teammates. You are not going to meet people that are outside your team. Each interviewer would have some area of focus. For example, some interviewers might be focused on databases, while other could be testing your understanding for computer architecture. The interviews are normally composed of 5 minutes general conversation about yourself, the projects that you've done in the past, your impressions and motivations to be in the company. Then you have 20 minutes for coding questions. For example, they could ask you to implement some sorting algorithm and so on. Then you will get 20 minutes for system design questions. And here they could ask, for example, to design a large distribution cache. The questions quite often are focused on the area that you claim to have past experience in. Or sometimes it depends on the area that the interviewer was working in. So in the end of the day, it is very possible that you are going to meet the program manager with which you are going to have a general conversation about your concerns about the company, about the offices that you prefer to work in, and so on. And while we are doing that, the interviewers are discussing your performance and whether they want to hire you or not. They submit all of their reviews for you, and finally, the hiring manager has the word to say whether he wants to hire you or not. It is very often that you get decision on the same day, whether positive or negative. So this is quite good about this company because just the same as Apple, they're trying to inform you in the same day, so you're not worried for the next days once you get home. Hello everyone and welcome to that video. Today I want to talk to you about the behavioral questions. These are not technical questions but are very important for you to make a good impression for yourself, because your communication is one of the key aspects that is judged while you're going to an interview, because a company wants to hire mainly a good personality with good coding skills. Both of these things are equally important and you shouldn't underestimate the behavioral questions. The standard questions about your behavior are normally asking you to tell about a time that you did something. Okay, so you need to explain, for example, a time that you did a project, a time that you were part of the team, and how was it in that team? Were you a leader in that team? Were you following in that team? And so on. To simplify that process for you, I created this sheet that you can see in front of you that will make it very easy for you to prepare. So here, as you can see, you have project 1, project 2, and project 3, and actually project 4. And for each of those projects, you can write what was the most challenging thing you had, what you learned, what was the most interesting thing, the hardest bug that you fixed, did you enjoy the project or which project you enjoyed the most, and what conflicts and discussions you had with your teammates about the projects. So if you think of 4 projects that you've done in the past in your career, you can write them down and think of each of those details about them. Once you do that, go over what you've written, and this will really prepare you very good for those behavioral questions. I really recommend you, especially if you have a phone interview with a recruiter or technical stuff, to have this table in front of you, because they are definitely going to ask you this type of questions. So I advise to have this table in front of you so you can easily scan and remember projects that you've done in the past. Of course, if you have face-to-face interview, then you cannot do that. But hopefully, once you look at this table time by time, these answers will stick inside your brain, and once you get answered, they will immediately appear. Now, the next thing I want to discuss is how to answer when you're asked about your weaknesses. Now, weaknesses from the type, my greatest weakness is that I work too hard and I perform very well, but I'm too big a perfectionist. Just say to the interviewer that you want to admit that you don't want to answer the question, or they will just show that you want to avoid the question. And nobody wants to work with someone like that. This really shows your arrogance towards the interviewer question, and it is actually quite offensive. So trust me, after you answer like this, they will tell you, okay, thank you. And then you will get a negative points for us answering like that. Instead, what you should focus on is a real weakness that you have. A real weakness, and then tell them what are you doing to fix that weakness. So this is the best answer. So for example, if they ask you for your greatest weakness, you can say, sometimes I don't have very good attention to detail. While that's good because it makes me execute my tasks quickly, it also means that sometimes I make careless mistakes. Because of that, I always have someone to double check with me until I'm confident that my work is perfect. Or another example, if they ask you about something challenging that you had, you shouldn't say, I had to learn a lot of new languages and technologies. This is very vague and means that you don't know what to answer. It tells the interviewer that you've done nothing that was actually that hard. So you need to remember, every time that you answer a question, you don't just answer the question, but you also tell to the interviewer about yourself. So when you answer, always try to involve something that shows who you are and how you deal with problems. Now, the next thing is that in the end of the interview, they would always ask you to ask them questions. And in that case, you should always ask questions. This will really show your interest to the company and will also show that you pay attention to detail and you feel that the one that was interviewing you didn't give you enough information. So you show them that you're seeking for that information, which is very important in every job. And of course, the quality of your questions will be a very big factor for them to realize whether you're smart or not. While some questions could just come in your mind during the interview, you shouldn't rely on that. You should always prepare questions before the interview. And there are a few types of questions that you can ask. I divided them in three categories: genuine questions, insightful questions, and passion questions. Let's look each of them and see what they represent. The genuine questions represent things that you want to know. Here are a few ideas. For example, you can ask, how much time in a day do you spend for coding? Or how many meetings do you have a week? You can ask about the employees in the companies. For example, what is the ratio between the testers and developers? This really shows that you understand the process of software development and testing. Then you can ask the insightful questions. And the insightful questions are all about demonstrating that you have a very deep knowledge about programming and technologies. For example, you can say, I noticed that you use technology X. So with that technology, how do you handle problem Y? Or for example, if you're doing something for web development, you can say, why did the product choose to use HTTP protocol over the HTTPS protocol? Isn't the HTTPS more secure? So what was the reason? And this really shows that you understand the job and you understand what you're talking about. The final category are the passion questions, and here you don't aim to show your technical skills, but here you aim to show your passion about the technology. For example, if you go to those companies like Amazon that are very interested into scalability, you can ask, I'm very interested in scalability. Did you came with some background in this? Or what opportunities are there to learn about it? Or you can say that you're not familiar with some technology, but it sounds very interesting and you would really want to learn more about it. Not knowing some things about the job is not bad. It is impossible to know absolutely everything involved in your work, so asking questions is one of the key qualities that the employers are looking for. So, as I said, usually the employers start with the soft skills, which are the conversations you are starting before the technical interview. So, I just want to give you some general advices, and I want to advise you that you should be specific but not arrogant, and there is a difference between those terms. And I'll give you an example between the two. So, asking you about what work you did for your previous company, let's say candidate A or candidate 1 says, I basically did all the hard work for the team, while the candidate 2 says, I implemented the file system, which was considered one of the most challenging components because. So you can see that actually Try to guess which sounded more arrogant. Yes, you're right. Candidate 1 sounded way more arrogant, while the candidate 2 shows that he is very impressed by the work that he was doing. Candidate 1 sounds more arrogant, or he doesn't appreciate or he didn't appreciate the work of his previous team, but only his, which means that he is capable for doing that in the future with his future team. You always need to structure your answer with the SAR approach. Well, you don't need to, but this is just the most widely spread approach for answering behavioral questions. For example, if they ask you, tell us about challenging interaction with your teammate, you first will describe the situation. For example, you would say, on my operating system project, I was assigned to work with 3 other people. While 2 were great, the third team member didn't collaborate much. He stayed quiet during our meetings, rarely chipped during the mail discussions, and struggled to complete his components. So here's how you explain the situation. Then you need to explain the action. So the action could be something like, one day after class, I put him aside to talk to him about the course, and then I moved the topic to talking about the project we were doing. I asked him open-ended questions on how he felt on what he was doing, and I asked him which components were the most exciting for him. He struggled all these components and yet offered me to do the write-up. I then realized that he wasn't lazy, he was just really confused about the project and lacked of confidence. I worked with him after that to break down the components into smaller pieces, and I made sure to compliment him for his hard work. So this is the action. This is the action that you did in order to solve the situation with your colleague. And finally, the result. He was still the weakest member in the team, but he got better. He was able to finish all of his work on the time, and he was contributing way more in discussions as he was understanding the material right now. In the end of the project, we were actually happy to work with him in a future project because he appeared to be a really nice person. So you can see that here I'm showing the whole situation, the whole picture. You can imagine what was happening in the team. So that's why I advise you always to first describe the situation, then the action, and then the result. In that way, you would be the most clearly understood by the recruiters or the technical members. So that was everything, guys. I hope this video was quite useful for you to build your behavioral skills and a good starting point to start learning them. That said, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in our next video. Hi everyone, finally it is time to talk a little bit deeper about a technical interview or how to prepare for technical interviews. Now, before starting with the coding exercises, which are plenty and we're going to cover them in the next sections, I just wanted to tell you the best practices for dealing with the technical problems. Now, first of all, I want to advise you not to memorize all the solutions for the different technical problems that you can find in internet. Don't do that. Memorizing or trying to solve a specific question by simply memorizing it in your head will really not help you. You cannot trick the interviewer like this. Instead, try to solve the problem on your own. I mean, really, solve it. Many questions are designed to be tough, but that's okay. When you solve a problem, try to think about space, time, and efficiency. Ask yourself if you can improve the time efficiency by reducing the space efficiency, or vice versa. Write the code of the algorithm on a paper. You've been coding all your life on a computer. You've used all the nice things about it, but in your interview, you won't have the luxury of the syntax highlights, of the code compilation and computing. So instead of that, try writing your code on paper. This will help you enormously. Once you do that, put this code in a computer, character by character, and see if what you had in your memory actually works on the computer properly. This is how it's gonna be on the real interview. And finally, do a mock interviews. We talked about this in the previous videos. It is very important that you have a friend or somebody that can just give you the questions so you can answer and you feel the same pressure as being interviewed. Now, while I don't want to give you a specific algorithms and solutions, I can give you a table of tasks that are asked on the most coding interviews. So I would like you to concentrate specifically on them at first, and once you are confident with them, you can concentrate on other algorithm solutions and to make your brain work. But I'm pretty sure if you learn those, then any coding exercise that I give you related to those, even slightly different, you would be able to solve it, especially if you understood those algorithms already. And luckily, in our courses, you can actually find all of those algorithms solved. But even though I will provide you with the solution of those, you really need to make sure that you understand them, because in most of the interviews, they're really going to test your understanding rather than simply writing a code. Now, another thing that I believe many students concentrate, but it is pointless. The interviewers usually don't ask questions like what is variable or tell me the Python or Java history and so on. They just want to see that you can solve questions. So don't concentrate too much about those type of questions that are not testing your thinking but your knowledge about the programming language. Because the knowledge for the programming language you can actually find it in internet. But the way of thinking for solving problems, it is way harder and way more valuable for companies such as Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and so on. I will add here that it is actually possible to get those questions, but this would usually happen for smaller companies and from interviewers that are not quite clear for the programming language that they interview about. Interviews are supposed to be difficult. If you don't get every or any answer immediately, that's fine. In fact, most of the interviewed people are actually getting the questions right from the first time. So the key here is that when you get a hard question, don't panic. Just talk about the solution or how would you solve it, what approach would you use. And you should always know that you're not done answering your question before the interviewer says that you're ready. What I mean is that when you come up with an algorithm, start talking about the problems that you already solved and how you accomplished that. So here we're going to talk about the 5-step approach to solving technical questions. And in the next slides, we're going to talk about the fact that you need to ask the interviewer questions to resolve what you don't understand into that questions. I will talk about how to design an algorithm and how to write a pseudocode before actually moving to the actual compilation of that code. We'll talk about the speed for writing the code and why it is not necessary and even adverse to write your code too fast. And finally, I will tell you how you can test your code and carefully fix any mistakes that you created while you were writing the pseudocode. Technical problems are more ambiguous than they might appear, so make sure that you ask questions to resolve anything you might be unclear for you. By asking questions, you can easily find out the question is actually way easier than you thought. In fact, many interviewers, especially the ones in Microsoft, will test you specifically if you ask questions. So please do that. This will help you, and also this will show to the interviewer that you really want to get in depth to solve that problem. For example, if you're asked to design an algorithm to sort a list, you could ask a question. What is the type of list? An array or linked list? Or what does the array hold? Numbers, characters, and so on. This will show that you really understand what the problem is and that The solutions might go in different ways, so you want the things more clear. You could ask also about if the numbers that needs to be included in this array are integers or not, and so on. So from the initial problem, design an algorithm to sort lists, now you have well more defined question. Now the question they ask you is actually to sort an array containing integers between 0 and 130. And how you can solve this? You can just create an array with 130 elements and count the number of ages at each value. Quite simple. Designing an algorithm can be quite tough, but you can use those 5 approaches to solve an algorithm, and actually I will cover this in more detail in the next video. So your approach should start by asking yourself the question, what are the space and the time complexities? Then what happens if there's a lot of data? Is the code getting solved in the same way, or does it become more complicated? Is your design causing an issues? For example, if you are creating a modified version of binary search tree, did your design impact the time for insert, find, and delete options? If there are other issues in the code, were they worth it? And did you thoughtfully create these issues in the code to solve even bigger issues? And finally, ask yourself the question, if they gave you specific data, have you leveraged the information? Everything that they give you during the question, you normally need to use. So if you have some information left that is unused, then you're probably doing something wrong. Now, writing up pseudocode first can help you outline your thoughts clearly and reduce the number of mistakes you commit. But always I would advise you to make sure that you say to the interviewer that you're writing a pseudocode, and this is just the first step before writing the real code. Some interviewers might think that you don't know how to code because your pseudocode would look quite random. So please make sure that you inform them. Once you start coding, you don't need to rush while writing the code, and this might really hurt you. I would advise you to go nice, slow, in a methodological way. And I want you to remember a few advices which might simplify the task for writing code. The first one is to use data structures generously. Where relevant, use a good data structure to define certain class or element that you created on your own. For example, if you're asked to solve a problem which involves finding the minimum age for a group of people, consider defining a data structure for a person. This will definitely show you and to the interviewer that you're quite good and you're thinking in an object-oriented manner. The next advice I would give you is to do not crowd your coding. This is a small thing, but it could be really helpful. So when you're writing code on a whiteboard, start from the upper left corner, not in the middle. This will definitely give you plenty of space if you do mistake, or if you want to delete some code, or if just the code that you write is too long. And finally, I would always advise you to test your code. Always consider testing for the extreme cases, or see the borders of the values that you need to include and check exactly for those borders. Checking for numbers somewhere in the middle don't show you anything. So, for example, you would like to check for extreme cases such as 0, negative, null, maximum, and so on. I would also advise you to use exceptions and error handling, so you can predict actually when a user does an error and you give him the correct error message. If the algorithm is numerical or quite complicated, for example, bit shifting, arithmetic, etc., consider testing while you're writing the code. So let's say if you write a function, first test it and then continue to the next one. Also, when you find mistakes, carefully think about why those mistakes happened. The worst thing you can do is to fix mistakes by breaking other parts of your code. and this really creates a complete mess that nobody can solve. So those are the 5 top steps, guys, for approaching technical questions. Of course, we're gonna go way further in that course, but this is just an introduction to how you can approach technical questions. And bear with me in the next video, well, where we're going to talk about the 5 algorithm solving approaches. Every algorithm is different. And to be honest, there is not a clear path for solving absolutely every question in the same way. However, from most of the algorithmic questions that I've seen, I found 5 approaches that would really help you and are applicable to almost all of the algorithms out there that you might be asked on an interview. So you can choose either of those approaches to solve your questions, or you can even mix and match them and choose the one that you like the most. So those approaches are exemplifying, pattern matching, simplify and generalize, base case and build, and their structure, brainstorm. So let's start with the first one. The first approach is called exemplify. And here you need to write specific examples of a problem and see if you can figure out a rule that can solve that problem. For example, if you are given a time, you want to calculate the angle between the hour and the minutes. So in that case, you would create this clock, and let's create the first example, which will say that the hour is 3:27. You can draw a picture and write the arrows to show 3:27 as I did here. So by playing around with a few examples of the time that I provided you and some other times, you can develop a rule. For example, we can say that while the arrows of the clock are at 12 o'clock, we can multiply 360 to the minutes, and then from that we can divide by 60. And this will be our minute angle. Okay, so this is for minutes. 360 multiplied by the minutes divided by 60. Then you can find the hour angle, which will be slightly more complicated. And as I see from the clock, it will be equal to 360 multiplied by the hour divided by 12, or what's left after we divide hour by 12. Then we will divide that by 12, and then we'll add 360 multiplied by the minutes divided by 60, and then we will multiply that by 1 divided by 12. Okay, it looks a little bit more complicated, but if you do a few examples, you can really see how this works. And sorry that I drew the first one. I just figured out that I drew quite ugly, so that's why I prefer to just write it here in that text box. And this is gonna be for hour. So once you have the minute hour angle, then you can actually find the angle between the minute and the hour by simply subtracting from the hour angle, so hour angle minus the minute angle, and then you can do percent 360, or what's left after you divide them by 360. Okay, and just by examples you can find the solution of that problem. Now approach 2 will be pattern matching, and pattern matching means that is solving the algorithm by matching to what is similar to already known problems that you solved in the past. So if you have a problem that you've already solved, you can probably modify the solution of that problem in order to match the solution for the new problem. For example, let's say that a sorted array has been rotated, that the elements might appear in order 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2. How would you figure the minimum element? Well, a similar problems to that one would be find the minimum element in array, or find a particular element in array, or binary search. So finding a minimum element is not very interesting algorithm. You could just iterate through all the elements. So the first case that we had here might not be very useful in that case that we have. However, a binary search is very applicable. You know that an array is sorted, but in this case it's rotated. So let's say if we compare the first and the middle element 3 and 6, you know that the range is still increasing. This means that the rest point must be after the 6. We can continue applying the lessons from the binary search pinpoint by looking at the ranges left higher than right. And if left is smaller than right, then the range doesn't contain the rest. If left is higher than right, then it does. The next approach is simplify and generalize. In that case, you can change the constraint to simplify the problem, and after that you can try to solve it. So once you get the algorithm for the simplified problem that you just did in that step, then you can simplify and generalize the problem again. For example, a ransom note can be formatted by cutting words out from a magazine to form a new sentence. Now, would you figure out if a ransom note or a string can be formatted from a given magazine, which is actually another string? You can definitely simplify that, so instead of solving the problem with words, you can solve it with characters. So we imagine that we're actually cutting the characters out of the magazine for a ransom note. And now, once we write the algorithm, we can solve the simplified ransom note problem by generalizing that algorithm and do a very similar thing but with the characters. Then we can simplify this once again, and instead of creating an array of character counts, we can create a hash table, and each word maps the number of times that the word appears. And the final solution, which is actually my favorite, is the base case and build. This means when you get a complex problem, first you try the base case or try it for something very simple, then try to solve it for that element and try to increase the complexity progressively following the same logic. And finally, you can actually solve the initial algorithm quite easily simply by incrementing the difficulty of your solution. For example, if you're asked to design an algorithm to print permutations of a string with unique characters, you can first test it for a string A, B, C, D, E, F, G, the simplest case. So in case A, you would get A. In case AB, you would get AB, BA. Then for the case ABC, try to guess what you're gonna get. But now you can get the logic, and you can see how when you're incrementing, it is quite clear for all of us what is going to be the solution for the next case, and I advise you to write it down on the paper. You can easily find that we need here a recursive algorithm that can chop off the string and write all the permutations here. And actually I put it one more approach here after this one, which is called data structure brainstorm. And this solution is a bit weird, I don't use it quite often, but sometimes it really works. You simply need to go after different data structures, try each one of them and see what works the best for you. For example, if you have a task that you have numbers that are randomly generated and stored into an array, you could be asked, how would you keep track of the median of those numbers? So you can try different types of data structures. For example, you can start with linked list. So let's think about linked list. Well, I would say probably not. This is just because the linked lists are not very good with assessing and sorting numbers. Then we can think about array, and array might not be too bad, but we already have an array. So we would like to keep the elements somehow sorted. So in that case, an array would be too time consuming and potentially expensive. Then we can think about a heap or binary tree. For example, with binary tree, we can really actually solve the problem because the binary tree is quite good in ordering. In fact, if the binary search tree is perfectly balanced, the top of the tree might be the median number. But be careful. If there is an even number of elements, the median number is here actually the average of the middle of the two elements. And obviously the middle two elements cannot both be on the top, so you wouldn't be able to find the answer in that case. And finally, you think about heap, and heap is actually a really good at basic ordering and keeping track on the maximum and the minimum numbers. This is actually interesting. If you had two heaps, you could keep a track of the biggest half and the smallest half of the elements. The biggest half is kept in the minimum heap, while the smallest half is kept in the maximum heap. Now, with these data structures, you have the potential median elements at the roots. If the heads are no longer the same size, you can quickly rebalance the heaps by popping an element of one heap and pushing it into another one. So these were all the algorithms, guys, or all the ways for solving algorithms. I hope this was useful and help you understand what type of techniques you can have when you're asked algorithmic questions. That said, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the course. Today we're going to start training for the coding interview by solving algorithms. And this is what you're actually going to see until the end of the course. We're going to cover different topics that might be also covered in your interview and solve algorithms that are normally asked on those interviews. So I chose to start with the mathematical programming questions, and the very first thing that I want to show you is how we're going to store our code, and in the IDE that we're going to use, we'll write the code straight into .py files. So for that purpose, I will open PyCharm. So let me open PyCharm here, and I will create a new project. So create a new project, and I would expect you, before doing that, actually to have a folder that you already created where you're going to save that project. And in this project, we're actually going to create all of our files. So I have this folder called code where I'm going to save the Python project, and then progressively with every coding exercise I'm going to create new Python files into that project. So select create, and now as you can see we have our Python project created. I will of course delete everything from the main file, and I will create a new Python file, and the file will be called series AP, which is going to be basically the first algorithm that I'm going to show you how to solve. So here you have the following problem. Given the first two terms, A1 and A2 of arithmetic series, find the end term of the series. And what this means is that, for example, if your input is A equals 2 and A2 equals 3 and N equals 4, then your output should be 5. And this is because the first two terms in our series are 2 and 3, and we have 4 numbers in that series, right? So if we start with 2, then we have 3, then we have to increase with 1, which means 4, and then we will increase with 1, which means 5, right? And so on. And the fourth element will be 5, right? If, for example, here to A2 I add 4, then you have different type of series, because here you start with 2, then you have 4, then you have 6, then you have 8, then you have 10. So our algorithm will also detect the difference between the first two numbers, and then we'll create the whole series, and finally it will find the nth number, or the number that we want to find in that function. And yes, here we're going to create mainly functions, and we're going to select input for the functions, which is going to be A1, A2, and N, and then we have output. So I advise you, if you're not familiar with how functions work, you should have a very good understanding before moving to those exercises in the whole course. But luckily, we have introduction to Python videos where you can definitely see that. So let's start writing the algorithm. And the algorithm is actually quite straightforward. And in order to do it, I will create a function. And in Python, function is created with def. And let's our function be called like the name of the file is series ap. Okay, then I will open brackets, and inside I write self, okay, self, comma, a1, comma, a2, comma, n. And those are the parameters that are going to be passed to the function, okay? So after you have those parameters passed to the function, now the next step is to actually write the logic inside the function. So the very first thing I would want to do is to find the difference between A1 and A2, okay, so we can predict what is going to be the next number. So obviously the difference will be 2 in this case here, but how to do it in code? We'll create a different variable called difference, and the difference will be equal to A2 minus A1. Okay, so every parameter we pass here, we're going to find the difference variable between the two parameters. And then we would like to find the nth term, right? Or in that case, the fourth term. So I will do n term, and the n term will be actually equal to a1, or the first number, plus n minus 1, okay, because if n is equal to 4, minus 1 here will give us 3 plus a1, right? So if we have the fourth number here, right, if a1 is equal to 2 and a1 is the first number, then we would like to increment a1 by 3, and 3 actually multiplied by the difference, okay? So what we're simply doing here is that we're using the a1 as a starting point. A2 we use it only in order to find the difference between the first and the second number, so we can predict next numbers. And if we're looking for the fourth number, here n minus 1 will be equal to 3 multiplied by the difference, which is a2 minus n1. In our case, this is equal to 2. So 2 multiplied by 3 equals 6, plus 2 will be equal to 8. And as you can see, the fourth element in our sequence will be equal to 8. Okay, that makes sense. And finally, we would like to return the n term. So I will do a return n term, and our function is completed here. So now let's actually test our function. And you can do that by simply writing. So once the function is created, guys, actually first of all I remove the self from this here, because I had this function before written in a class, and since now I move it out of the class, you don't need to actually have self. So once it is created, let's actually test it. So let's test it with the new parameters that I just created and prove that the fourth number is equal to 8. So we should get output of 8. So what I will do, I will create a different variable that will also be called n term. And here in the brackets, I will write, actually no, this will be equal to series AP, and here I will pass the parameters A1 equals to 2, then A2 will be equal to 4, and then N will be equal to 4 as well. Okay, and then let's print n term. Okay, so what we expect is by adding the input, actually here should be 8, by adding the input of 2 and 4, the fourth number should be equal to 8. So let's run our code and see if that works properly. So as you can see, the fourth number is equal to 8, and let's change n to be equal to 5. You can actually stop the video and check it yourself if this equation is going to stand for n equal to 5. So let's run that, run, and you can see that the next number is 10. If I write 6 here, you will see that the next number will be equal to 12, and so on. So this is the first algorithm, guys. Congratulations for solving it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in our next video. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the course. As you solved the last question that we had last time, now we can move to the next mathematical question, and to do that, I will create a new Python file here. So new Python file, and this file will be called POW or not. Okay, so here is your task. When you're given a number n, find if the digit of the sum of digits of the n is palindrome or not. And what palindrome means, I actually wrote it here down for you. Palindrome is a number that stays the same when you reverse it. So 121 is a palindrome because when you reverse it, you get also 121. The same is with 131, and the same is with the single numbers as well. For example, 7. So, for example, here, if you pass the number 56, you should get an output of 1, because when you pass 56, 5 plus 6 equals 11, and 11 is palindrome. So we need to create a function that firstly combines the numbers that we found, okay, the sum of digits, and then finds if they're palindrome. So that sounds quite a simple task for programmers like us. And let's write a function. I advise you, of course, to stop the video and try writing it yourself, and then see how I'm gonna solve it. But you don't actually need to do that, because I'm also going to give you some exercise in this course, so you have plenty of time to practice your skills. Now, let's write the function. So let's write a def, and the def will be called is palindrome. So a function that will check if a number is palindrome. And here you only need to pass a number. Okay, so this task composed of a few things that we need to do. The first thing is to create a sum of all the numbers. So to do that, first I will create a new parameter or variable called new num, and this in the beginning will be equal to 0. Okay, so we'll create a new num, it will be equal to 0. Later on, we're going to put the value to that number. Now you can calculate the sum of numbers in a few ways. So in order to calculate the sum of the digits into the number, we should think for some very smart way to firstly separate those digits, and secondly summing them. So for that reason, I'll write a while loop. So let's do while n is higher than 0. Okay, so here we'll make sure that we work only with positive numbers. And the first thing I would want is to remove the first digit of the number. Okay, so for example, for 56, I want a new number that is equal, let's say, to 5. So here I will write new number, Okay, and remember, new number is equal to 0, and the new number is actually going to be the sum of all the numbers that are contained into a number that we pass to that function. But we need to do that iteratively. Okay, so while n is higher than 0, let's create new number to be plus equal n percent 10. Okay, and I will tell you why I'm doing that. So let's pull a calculator, and if I write, for example, 56 divided by 10, I will get 5.6, right? So this means that 56 divided by 10 equals to 50, and what's left is 6. So the percentage means that here the result will be what's left after 56 is divided by 10, which means that the result of that will be 6. So first of all, we'll remove the 6 from here and we'll pass it to the new number. Okay? So after we do that, here we have 6, and the next thing I will do is I will do a round division. So a round division can be done with double slash equals 10. So this means that when n is divided by 10, we're rounding to the nearest whole number. Okay, so 56 floor division by 10 would be equal to 5. So what we're aiming to do here is first we're going to assign this to the new number, or the nth digit of the whole number to the new number. Then we're going to remove the final digit and we have n equal to 5, and after that we will do the loop once again. So here n will be equal to 5, which is higher than 0, then it will go here, and 5 divided by 10, what's left from it is actually 5. So this will also be added to the new number, so we get 5 plus 6, which is equal to 11. And even if you have higher number like 256 or something like that, well, this is the same. You will just have one more iteration because n will be higher than 0 for one more iteration than usual. For example, if you have, let's say you have 256, right? So once we go to the while loop, 256 is higher than 0. Then the new number will plus equal to n, which is 256, divided by 10. What's going to be left will be 6. So the new number will be equal to 6. Then n divided by 10, with a floor division, we'll remove the 6 and we'll get 25. Then on the next iteration, since 25 is higher than 0, then the new number will plus equal to 25 divided by 10. And what's going to be left is going to be 5 here. And this we're going to be adding it to the new number because we have plus equals. And finally, after the floor division, we will be left with 2. Because we will round, we will be left with 2, and this 2 here will be also added to the previous number. So this is how it works, guys. So no matter what number you put here, you always get the new number as a sum of all the numbers in that whole number that you pass to the function. Now, once you did that, and once you have the new number is actually going to be equal now to the sum of all the digits of the number we passed, which is good. Now let's create another variable which will be called ref new number, or the reverse number, which initially will be equal to 0. Then let's do n equal to new number. Okay, so n will hold the same value as new number later in our function. And finally, once we set that, I would like to check if the reverse number is the same as the new number, right? So here we're checking if 11 is the same as 11 reversed, or in that case would still be 11. So usually you can do that with while loop, and I would advise to do that. So you can write while n is higher than 0, you can write reversed or new number, which was previously equal to 0, will be equal to rev new number multiplied by 10 plus n, which here is our new number, and in our exact case this will be 11 divided, or what's left when it's divided by 10. Okay, so what's left when this number is divided by 10 will of course be 1. So this is one of the digits, and then to that digit on the first iteration we're adding 0. Okay, then again I will use the technique for removing the second digit, so n floor division by 10. And what's happening in this while loop, guys, is, for example, the number that you pass here, let's say 11, when it passes the first iteration, the revised new number will be equal to 0, because the revised new number here is 0, multiplied by 10 is 0, plus 11 divided by 10, what's left is 1. So here this will be equal to 1. And then n floor division by 10, so 11 floor division by 10 will give us 1. So in the next iteration, n will be equal to 1, while the revised new number will also be equal to 1. So here you have 1 multiplied by 10 plus 1 divided by 10, what's left is 1. So here you will get 10 plus 1, which will be equal to 11. And this is our revised number. Why I'm using this technique is because what's actually happening here is that the revised new number always holds the value that we calculated with this equation here. And this is a little bit more tricky, but it is the simplest way to reverse a number. So the idea here is first the revised number to be equal to the last digit of our n number. Then here we remove the last digit, and for example from 11 we'll have the 1 left, and 1 we know that here it will be the sign of the tens. So that's why we multiply it by 10, and this is how you get 1 and 1 after that. If for example again you have here the number 256, it will be a similar thing. First here you assign to the revised number only 6, because the revised number initially is 0. So here will be 0 plus what's left when you divide 256 to 10, it's 6. So first it will be equal to 6, then you remove the 6 and you have 25, and here you would get 6 multiplied by 10 will be equal to 60, plus n divided by 10 here will be 5, so you will get here 65. And finally, once you do the floor division here, you will get 2, and here you will get 65 multiplied by 10, which will be equal to 650, plus n divided by 10 here will be equal to 2. And this is how on the first iteration you will have 256, then you will have ref equal to 0, the next revision will be equal to 6, then the next revision, or the next reverse number, will be equal to 65, and then the final revision would be equal to 65 multiplied by 10, which is equal to 650, plus 2 that is left for n, and this will give us 652. And this is how we reverse 256, and in the same way it should work with 11. So this is how you reverse number just in 2 lines, guys, and I really advise you to remember these lines here, because they can be really helpful, as many of the interviews are involving some type of reversing any kind of numbers. So let's do here. Once we get the number we need, let's return from the function, and we want to return 1 if the reverse number, so ref new number, will be equal to the new number. Actually it's double equal, because here we're checking equality, and else the program should return 0. Okay, so what I say here is that if the reverse number is equal to our new number, which is that one and that one here, and the one that we got out of this function incremented. So if those two numbers are equal, then we'll get 1. Otherwise, we'll get 0, which means error. So let's try our example here, and as I said, n here is equal to 56. So if I simply do print, and then in the print statement I run this function with n equals to 56. So let's run the function, and remember, here the new number should be 11, and we should get answer 1, which means that the reverse number when we combine 5 and 6 is the same as the non-reverse number. Let's see now. So I run the palindrome or not palindrome, and you can see that you are getting 1. Let's do another number. So let's do some really long number, completely random, 1, 2, 3, 9. So let's first see logically how that number would look like. So 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 9 is how much? 4 plus 2 is equal to 6 plus 9. This is equal to 15, right? So 15, when you rotate it, it should be equal to 51, which is false, and we should get 0. So let's try that, and let's run the function and see if we get 0. You can see that here we're getting 0 because the reverse number is not the same. Let's try another one. Let's, for example, do 92, 92. So here the sum of 9 plus 2 plus 9 plus 2 is 22, and you can see that this number from both sides looks the same. So let's run the function, and here we should get 1 because 22 is a palindrome. You can see that also here we got 1, and this means that our function is completely validated and it works properly. So this is how, guys, you reverse numbers in a logical way. That video was a little bit longer, but I really needed to explain you how you can do that in a very simple way. So in a coding interview, of course, you can do it in different ways, but I found this one to be the most efficient and covering the least lines of code. That's it. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the course. In today's video we're going to solve one very fun mathematical issue, and here I will give you two numbers. The numbers will be a and b, and once you pass those numbers to the function, we need to find the kth digit, or a specific digit that we also pass to the function. So we need to find the kth digit from the equation a to the power of b. For example, if your input is a equal to 3 and b equal to 3 and k equal to 1, this means that when we do 3 to the power of 3, we need to find the first digit, okay? So let's say, and let me mention that this should be the first digit from right to left, okay? So for example, 3 to the power of 3 is 27. The first digit from the right is equal to 7. And so your output should be equal to 7. So I advise you to pause the video, try solve that yourself for a few minutes, try think about the issue, and then go back to the video where I will solve this problem for you. Now, this problem, of course, could take a lot of lines of code, but I will try here to really save you time and solve it into less than 10 lines. So let's see what can we do. Firstly, let's create a function def, and let's call it Kth Digit, and to this function we'll pass the parameters a, b, and k. Okay, so once I pass those parameters, we should start working with them, right? So the very first thing that I would need to do is, as I see, to do a to the power of b, right? So I would like to have another variable, and let's create a variable x, which will be equal, and in Python you usually do a power with the POW sign, okay? So this is a power, and firstly you put the base, okay? And after that you put the power, Okay, so since we want a to the power of b, I will put a and b here. Once that's done and we have the power, let's create a temporary variable, so temp, and this will be equal to 0. And obviously, since we have a temporary variable, we would like to increment it at some point, right? Now, in order to solve that, we need to start listing the digits from left to right. Okay, so I would like to use some technique that makes k. So let's write it like this. So I would like to create here a while loop. And in the while loop, I would like first to make a while for k higher than 0. So this loop will execute until k is equal or smaller than 0. So what we want to do first is to make the temporary variable, so the temp should be equal to the last digit, okay? And let's see after that. So if temp is equal to the last digit, and then we print the temp as a final answer, this would mean that k is equal to 1, right? Because from right to left, the first digit is going to be actually the last digit, right? So I could update temp over and over again for the different k's, and once k is equal to 0, then this while loop will stop working. So let's actually do that. Now let's first make temp to be equal to, so how to make temp equal to the last digit? So this is very simple. X is a to the power of b, so x percent 10 will give us the last digit, because this would mean that any number divided by 10, what would be left is what's basically the last digit of the number, right? So for example, 256 divided by 10 would give us 6 as something that is left after we divide it purely to 10. So that's good. This is how we get the digit on the right. And after that, I would like to create a new x, and the new x will be equal to x floor division to 10, which will remove the last digit of our number. So for example, if we have 2, 5, 6, for the next iteration, we're going to be left with 26, right? No, with 25. Okay, so if I do that, for the next iteration, x will be equal to that. And also for the next iteration, we would move one step to the right, sorry, one step to the left, which means that we would need to do k minus equals 1. Okay, so if k is equal to 5, now k will be equal to 4. So this means that for any next iteration, we would actually move one digit to the left, which is exactly what we want. So let's say if k is equal to 2 here, in the first iteration, the temporary number will be equal to 6. Then the x will be equal to 25, and for the next iteration, k minus equals 1 if k was 2. Then in the next iteration, k will be equal to 1. And then we will do temporary equal to x, which is 25 in that case. So 25% equals percent 10 would be equal to 5 here, okay? Then the x again will be updated, and it will be equal to 2 for the next iteration. But here, k minus equals 1, since k is equal to 1, for the next iteration, k will be equal to 0. Which means that the while loop will be cancelled here, and we will get the temporary variable equal to 2, which is exactly what we want, because if k is equal to 2, the second digit from right to left will be equal to 5. So that's good. This means that our while loop is completed, and I can return temp. Okay, so now no matter what number we pass, this while loop will return exactly what we need, and this is the kth digit from left to right of the a power of b. Let's test that out with the example that I provide you here. So if I do print, okay, so print a equal to 3, actually let's first write a function kth digit, okay, and here we need to pass 3 parameters, so a equal to 3, then comma b equals to 3, comma, and the digit would be 1, actually k equal 1, and what I would expect here is that we would get 7. Let's see our output console, and you can see that here, guys, we're getting 7, and this is exactly the first digit from left to right of 3 to the power of 3. If I write here 2, I would expect that there will be one more iteration to the while loop, so I should get 2. Let's check that, and as you can see, we're getting 2. Let's try with some really crazy numbers so we can really test our code. I even don't know what's the multiplication of those two, and let's k equal to 5, the 5th digit. So let me pull out my calculator, and 5345 multiplied to 342 will be equal to that enormous number, to 1 million something. And actually here I'm proving you that you really need to test your code for different numbers just to prove that it works properly. So the 5th digit would be from right to left, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I would expect that the output here will be 2. Let's see. So if I run the code, actually I got 9, which was not the number that I was expecting, but of course I did the mistake, and maybe some of you noticed it. And the mistake was that I had to do a to the power of 3, but not multiplication, which I did, which actually makes things even more complicated. So here I will need to do 345 to the power of 3, 4, 2. And actually my calculator cannot calculate that, but I guess the program can. Let's actually calculate it here. Print. So there is actually no surprise why my calculator couldn't print that, because this is actually the number that I got, and luckily Python can actually estimate it. So let's see if the 5th digit from right to left is actually 5. It's actually 9, sorry. So we have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can see that the 5th digit is 9, and even with these enormous numbers, you are getting the final result, which means that your code is actually very efficient and works perfectly. So that's it, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this problem really helped you practice your Python skills. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Hi guys, today we're going to solve a different mathematical problem, and we're going to talk about finding the LGM and GCD. So your task would be to create a function that when we pass two numbers, it finds the LCM and the GCD. So LCM is the smallest number divisible by all given numbers. So both of the numbers should be divisible by this number, which should be the smallest possible, while the greatest common divisor is the largest number that can divide all the given numbers. Okay, make difference here between divisible and divide. Here we're looking for a number that is divisible to all numbers, while here we're looking for a number that can divide both numbers, which are two very different things. So let's create a function here. I will do def, and I will do def LCM and GCD. Okay, so this function will solve both things, and we will pass the numbers a and b as we have in our task. So once we have those numbers passed, then I would like to put those numbers in an array. Okay, so let's create first an empty array, and you can do that by writing r equals to 0 multiplied by 2. Okay, so now we have array with two cells, and then let's write g equals to mat dot greatest common divisor. Okay, and here we just find the greatest common divisor of a and b, or the numbers that we passed. So this is how you find the greatest common divisor of two numbers. Quite simple task, especially with Python, because you have this very comfortable function here. Now, the greatest common divisor was easy, but in Python we don't have actually a function that shows us the LCM, or the smallest number divisible by all given numbers. So for that reason, we have to create an equation which is quite simple. I will do L, and this will be our LCM, and this will be A multiplied by B. Okay, so this is my idea, to multiply first A to B, and then I will divide this to the greatest common divisor. Okay, so this is a very good technique, because here you're using the greatest common divisor of those numbers, which is the largest number that can divide both numbers, and then you divide their multiplication. This will definitely ensure that you have the largest possible number. And actually what you're doing here is you're doing floor division, as you can see. And here with the floor division, we actually ensure that we're not getting anything after the dot. Okay, so we're getting actually full numbers. So for example here, when we do a multiplied by b, which is 14 multiplied by 8, so 14 multiplied by 8 will give 112, and this will be divided by the greatest common divisor of those numbers, which is 2, okay, which is 56. So that's fine. Here we will get 56, and we will not need to remove anything, because we numbers after the decimal point. So let's try that out. And finally, a very useful thing is, when we created this array here, we actually didn't use in our equations, which are now completely solved, but we use it as an output, because it is better to give an output as an array and then print it. So I will do here arr0, comma arr1, or array 1 will be equal to L and G. Okay, so array 0 will be L, or the LCM, and the G will be array 1. And finally, let's return ARR, or our array. So this is my solution on how you can print the LCM and the greatest common divisor of two numbers. So now let's actually test our code for different numbers. And the first I will do the example 14 and 8. And remember, the LCM is equal to 56, while the greatest common divisor is equal to 2. So let's try that. So I will do print, and then I will do the LCM GCD, and in the brackets I will do A equals to 14, while B equals to 8. Actually, you can even change it, so let's do B equal to 14. Let's do B equal to 14, A equal to 8. This would not make any difference. So let's see what this function actually prints. So let's run it. And as you can see, we're getting an error. And I can see that the error here is that a name mat is not defined. And this is because here we also need to import the mat library. So let's do here import mat. Okay, let's save that. And let's try to run it again. So as you can see, once we import mat, now we can use the greatest common divisor function, which is great. And we're getting 56 as the LCM, and as the GCD we're getting 2, which is correct and means that our algorithm works properly. Let's try with other numbers. For example, 16, or let's do 27 and 12. So let's run that and let's see what happens. So you can see that the greatest common divisor is 3 because both numbers are divisible by 3, and also 108 is the LCM. Let's actually see. So 27 multiplied by 12, and then we divide that by 3 and you get 108, which means that our function works properly. So you can try a few different examples, guys, to verify that your function works, but this is basically how you're getting the largest number that divides two numbers and also the smallest number divisible to those numbers. Now, in the end of that video, I actually want to give you a task, an exercise that you can complete for the next video. So I want you to try solving this on your own. Of course, in the next video, I will give you the solution, but I want to see what you can do about it. So here I want to give you a task, very common for the coding interviews, where for a given positive integer n, you need to find factorial of n. And if you don't know what factorial is, this is basically multiplication for all the numbers that are building the number that was passed. For example, if the number was 5, factorial of 5 would mean that you multiply 5, multiply by 4, by 3, by 2, and by 1. And then you need to find the result. So here I can give you a hint. And my hint would be that a factorial is usually written as a number multiplied by the function of that number minus 1. Okay, so let's say if you have the number x, this would mean that factorial of x is equal to x multiplied by factorial of x minus 1, and so on. So you need to do some iterations in order to solve that, so I can suggest you to use loops here. So try to solve that on your own without using the help of internet. And in the next video, I will show you the very easy solution with Python. That said, guys, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in our next video. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Hi everyone, and welcome back to the course. Here we are to our factorials exercise, and I can show you how easy it is to solve it. Actually, before that, I will give you another hint that here you need to use a for loop in order to solve that. And with for loop, this becomes a very simple task that can be solved just with a few lines of code. So let's try that. First, I will create a function, and the function will be called factorial. Okay, and of course here we will need to pass only one number, to which we will need to find the factorial. Now, once you pass the number, you need to create a for loop in order to basically divide it into smaller numbers. So let's first create a variable, and I will create the variable called a and c, and initially this variable will be called to 1. Okay, then we can create a for loop that is calculating the factorial, and you know, in Python usually you use a combination of for and range. So for n in, or actually let's do for I, because n is already taken, for I in range, and we will start with 2 to n plus 1. Okay, and if you ask why we're using that range, it is because obviously always the first number, no matter what, will be equal to 1, and for that reason here we use ans. Okay, so here I will do ans will be equal to ans multiplied by I. And why I'm doing that, why for example I'm not starting from 0, is because if I start from 0 here is ans, if I start with 0, this result will always inevitably be equal to 0. So here I'm starting with the last number, which is 1, and in the first iteration this number will be multiplied by 2. Okay, and in the next iteration it will be multiplied by 3, then by 4, and so on. And this will continue until we reach n plus 1, or so when we reach n plus 1, this means that our loop will stop and the n plus 1 will not be executed. So this is how on every iteration you're multiplying all the numbers together and you are constantly updating the ans, so ans is getting bigger with any iteration. For example, for 5, first here we're going to iterate until this one is equal to 6. So this will mean that firstly ans will be equal to 1 and 1 will be equal to 1 multiplied by 2. So ans for the next iteration will be equal to, and in next iteration I will be equal to 3. So here the new ans will be equal to 2 multiplied by 3, which is equal to 6. Then ans will be equal to 4, so 4 multiplied by 6 will be equal to 24. Then I will be equal to 5, and 24 multiplied by 5 is equal to 120. And then here we'll reach n plus 1, which will be equal to 6, so the loop will stop executing. So I think that this will work properly, so let's return ans. Okay, and let's actually test our code and see if it works properly. So I will do print, and let's do a different number here. So I will do factorial, and here I will do 6, or actually n equal to 6. So we keep the logic here, and let's run that and see what happens. So when I run 6, it equals to 120. Let's see if this is the case. So 6 should be simply equal to 6 multiplied by 120, because factorial of 5 is 120. So factorial of 6 will be 120 multiplied by 6. So multiplied by 6, 120 multiplied by 6 will be equal to 720, which means that our program is working completely fine and can be executed for any number. Let's try with really large numbers. So let's try 654 and see what we're gonna get. You can see that the number here is absolutely huge, as you can see, and I think even after this digit we're not actually estimating anything else, but it's, you know, fun to play with so large numbers and see how large numbers can Python actually print. But anyways, guys, that was the solution for the task that I gave you yesterday. It's pretty simple when you see it how it's done, and you can really see that most of those tasks that are looking pretty complicated can be solved quite easily. That's it, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in our next video. Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to have a very interesting task, but before starting it, let me create a new Python file in which we're going to write our coding exercise. So let me create a new file. Actually, in the code I will create a new Python file, and the name of this file will be largest, or actually let me make it 6.largest prime factor. So here is your task. The task is that when I give you a number n, you need to write a code that finds the largest prime number that divides that number. Okay, so for example, you have something like input of 5, and then the output would be the largest prime number that divides 5. In that case, actually the largest prime number is 5. So you need to find some algorithm that solves that. Another example is if I give you a number that is 24 as an input, you get output 3 because 3 is the largest prime number that divides 24. Because 24 is 3 multiplied by 8, but since 8 is not a prime number, the answer here is 3. So how are we gonna solve that? Let's give a thought. In order to solve this problem, we can actually use a brute force approach here. And what I mean by this is that we can actually divide the number that we send to the function to different numbers until those numbers became higher than our input. And let me show you what I mean. So let's create a function def L prime number, which means the largest prime number. And here obviously I will pass a parameter n, which is going to be our input. So in order to start dividing n to different numbers and see which one is the largest prime number that divides it, we need to start from somewhere. And for that reason, I will create num equals 2. And this will be the initial value of the numbers that we're going to divide this number to. Now, this number is our starting point. So the next thing what we want to do is to create a while loop and start checking for all numbers that are smaller than n. And actually, we would like numbers that are actually smaller than square root of n. So let's do while num multiplied by num, which is the square root of num. And of course, the initial value of this number will be equal to 4, as you can see, is smaller or equal to n. Okay, so while that holds, so once it gets equal or higher than n, this loop will be exited. So while that stands, we can do an if statement. So if n divided by num actually gives 0, this means that num is equal to n, right? So this would mean that num is equal to n, or divides n evenly. Okay, so this is what it actually means. Let me actually put this one on a line, or actually let me leave it on the same one. So if that's the case and this is divided evenly, then what I would like to do is to make n equals n, right? And this will actually mean, so if the number divides n evenly, or the number is equal to n, this means that we actually found already our greatest common divisor. Actually, our smallest prime number, our largest prime number that divides the current number, okay? So we'll do n equal to n, and this would actually exit the loop, okay? So this is the case where 5, the output of 5 is equal to 5, because imagine, here we would first have 4 smaller or equal to n, and since n divided by 4 or 5 divided by 4 is equal to 0, this means that this will not be executed. So in that case, I will do else, and here we'll increment the number plus 1, plus equals 1. Okay, so this would mean that if this doesn't stand, we'll increment the number plus 1, and we'll of course return to the first statement of the while loop. And for example, in that case here, we will start with 4, we would go here, 4 will become 5, and after that we will divide 5 by 5, we'll get 0, and we will see that the greatest common, or the largest prime number that divides the number 5 is actually 5. Okay, this is the whole idea. And finally, as you can see, this is a very simple loop. Finally, let's return an integer of n. Okay, and this will be the largest number that divides our initial number that we pass to the function. Okay, and let me actually put a debug here so you can see how this actually works. And I will run the function with a number that is large. So let's put 46, for example. So for the number 46, I will do largest prime number, and actually let me put it in the brackets, so 46. and let's run our function, and in PyCharm you can actually run the function in debug mode. So let's run it here, and here we start our while loop, as you can see. But actually before that, let me actually remove the semicolon here, because I noticed that I added one, and also here is going to be n divided by num. Okay, so let's run our code for the number, as I said, 46, and see what happens. And as I promised, let me put again the debug mode. So let's run it in the debug mode, and let's see what's going on here. So we're currently on this line, and let me do a step forward. As you can see, n here is equal to 46, and the number is equal to 2. If I move a step forward, here the loop is executed, and here you can see that n is becoming equal to n divided by 2. Okay, let's run it once again. So here number becomes equal to 3 because we executed the else loop. Let's go further, n equal to 4, and this is how we execute the for loop. And finally, when n is equal to 23 and the number is equal to 5, obviously 5 multiplied by 5 is equal to 25, which is higher than n, so we exit the while loop. And here you can see that the largest prime factor of this number is actually equal to 5 as well. Actually, my apologies, it is equal to 23 because we're looking for the value of n. So this means that 23, and this actually makes sense because 23 multiplied by 2 is equal to 46, and 23 is a prime number. So here our result, our final result will be 23, since the output is the n here. Okay, and with this, our algorithm is successful. So if I rerun it, you will see that the output here is 23. Let's actually verify with our example. So if I run it for 24, I should get 3. So let's do here 24 and see if we're gonna get the right output. And it's 3. And that was it, guys. I hope that this video was useful. And also, if you came out with a different solution than mine and it still worked, congratulations. There are of course more than one scenarios with which you can create this algorithm. That's it. Thank you very much for watching that video, and I will see you in the next one. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the course. Today I want to do one very simple task with you, and actually, since you've got some practice from our previous lesson, you should be already a Python master and you should be really able to do that task by yourself. So I advise to stop this video right now, read it, and then try to do it on your own. So today what I'm going to do is I'm gonna create a code which the recruiters really like to give on interviews, and this is to find and write an algorithm that finds if a number is prime. So for a given number n, check if it's prime or not. And here I did some clarification for you. What is prime number? I guess you already know. A prime number is a number which is only divisible by 1 in itself. So this is very simple, and this is what you need to check in your code. For example, since 5 is a prime number, your output will be a boolean and your output will be 1. The script will return 1. For example, if you select 25, then your output will be 0 because 25 is not divisible by 25 and 1. It is also divisible by 5. Okay, it is 5 multiplied by 5. So let's try to come up with some algorithm to solve this issue. Now, first we need to know that 1 is not a prime number. So we need to mark that in our function, and this should be the very first thing. So let's do def is prime n, and n is going to be the number that will actually pass. And here I will do if a number, so if n is equal to 1, then what I want to do is to return 0. Okay, so we'll exit the function with 0, which means that the number is not prime. So if you actually have done the previous exercise, maybe what I'm going to do right now is going to be familiar to you, but in this case we are going to check a different thing. So let me do num equal to 2, okay, and then what I will do is I will create a while loop. So while loop, and in this while loop we will check if our number is divisible to any other number. So while I multiply by I is more or equal to n, sorry, here is num. So while num multiplied by num is smaller than n, so square root of num is more than n, then let's do if n divided by num. So if n divided by num doesn't give remaining 0, or actually it gives remaining 0, this means that n is divisible by some other number, right? So if n is divisible by some other number, then it is not prime. So we'll return 0. And after that, once we're out of this loop, I would like to increment the number. So n plus equals 1. And we'll execute for the next number, which is gonna be 3. Okay, so we check if 3 multiplied by 3 is more or equal to n. Then we will check if n is divisible to this number. If it is, we will return 0. And once we execute this while loop multiple times and we get the number, square root of the number, small or equal, actually higher or equal to n, then the while loop will be exited, which will mean that this number is actually prime because it's not divisible to anything else. So I'll return here 1 if we reach that stage of our loop. Okay, so this is how, guys, you find a prime number. Now let's test our function by print, and then let me write the name of the function, which is prime. And here let's put firstly a number that is prime, which is 17. 17 is a prime number. And let me actually run this function. So let me run. And you can see that we have a return 1, which means that 17 is a prime number. Let's try with some other number. Let's say 256 is definitely not a prime number because it has a lot of divisors. So let's run, and you can see that here we get 0 because this number is not prime. And let's test our code for ones. So if we get 1, since 1 is not a prime number, when we run this code we should also get 0. So this is how you solve, guys, this very famous issue here. And I hope that really was useful for you, and I also hope that you actually did it yourself because it is quite simple. Thanks for watching, and if you want to learn more coding skills like this one, hit the subscribe button.